Well, welcome everybody. A little bit different topic, I would say. After all the broiler breeder presentations, I will focus a little bit more on layer breeders. In this case, the focus points for feeding and management practices to support the hatchability in layer breeders. As a little bit an introduction, there are quite some differences, I would say, between the broiler breeder practice and the layer breeder practice. So just to follow the rest of the presentation, if we see the results nowadays in egg production numbers of the white leghorns today, so the commercials, I would say, then you see there is a huge increase in number of eggs compared to 1980 and compared to what we see today. Which means that if the offspring is producing this high amount of eggs, also the parents, they are prone to do this type of egg production as well. And secondly, we do see quite a flat egg weight curve. So both of that, as it's in the offspring, it also is already happening in the parent stock. However, if we focus on parent stock in layer breeding compared to commercial stock, then there's a huge difference whether you're producing a table egg or a hatching egg. Because obviously you would like to have a chick which is vital, which has a good hatchability rate. Anyway, what we do see over time is that the laying hen is quite well suitable to remain a stable nutrient level. So the goal from a laying hen itself is always to be able to produce a living chick or to produce a hatching egg. Therefore, beyond our breeding programs, we still see this natural selection for the stable nutrient levels, and that will really help for hatchability. However, if we talk about hatching eggs, then we talk about a little bit a fertile egg, obviously, because otherwise we don't have hatching eggs. It should be clean, so it should be free from bacterial infections, free from deviations as well, free from cracks, because cracks will have a huge impact on the hatchability, especially in the incubator. And it should have a sufficient weight, because if we have a low egg weight, we will see lower chick weights as well, which is not always so good. If we have a too high egg weight, as just explained, it will result in more heat production, so it's also not good. We need to have a sufficient weight of the egg. And then when the future chick is being produced, taking into account that hatchability or the fertility is there, then basically there are around 30 to 60,000 cells present in this egg which is just being laid. It's around 3 to 5 millimeter in diameter, so that's quite difficult to see though. But in this small spot, all the functions and all the cells are already there, determined to be this living chick. So this is also what we need to take into account when you talk about storage, when you talk about the farm, when you talk about the hatching and the transportation. So if we talk about hatchability, today we will focus on nutrition and on management, so on those 2 points, but also egg handling, biosecurity, and genetics have a huge impact on hatchability. Genetics, yeah, you see the difference between the broiler breeders and the layer breeders, so it will have a huge impact. If we first focus a little bit on management and hatchability, then there's actually a different focus when we look to males compared to females. So when we look to the females, then the focus should be on producing first quality eggs. So the clean eggs, no cracks, and so on. But also maintaining the feather cover. Feather cover is touched upon in the broiler breeder sessions. Well, the same as for layers. If the feather quality is going down, then we see less mating. And when you see less mating, fertility goes down as well. If we look to the males, however, then we see sperm quality, sperm quantity, but also the body composition of the male and the behavior of the male is important. The male should not be shy, because there should be mating, but the male should not be too dominant as well, that the females start hiding. However, if we look to layer breeders and we look to the body weight of layer breeders, we see the body weight difference is not that big, not as big as we see in the broiler breeders. So the previous slide I showed, there is a different purpose between both of them, but because of the relatively small difference in body weight, we only have one feeding system. And then you might think, okay, there is a different purpose and one feeding system. So who should be the reference? For us, we always say the reference is the female, because it's more important to have the number of eggs. So that's always the reference. Here's just the standard body weight actually, but what is more challenging as well is to reach the good body weight. So this is just a slide to show how the body composition in rearing, and how's the body weight growth in rearing as well. And if we look to the males specifically, we see the first few weeks focusing on sarcoid cell development, and at the final stage, the testes. This is normally quite well in line with the sexual maturity of the females. However, if we see a huge difference in the body weight development between the females and the males, compared towards the standard, then the sexual maturity is also different. And when your sexual maturity is not at the same time, you will have more difficulties also in relation to fertility. So you might wonder if they slightly need to have their own goal and their own target in terms of body weight development. Should you rear them together or should you rear them separately? Actually, common practice is to rear them together. So best is to have them together from day old onwards, and to rear them in the same type of system, same type of feed. The reason is we see a better mixing, we see a better behavior between the birds. If we start introducing the males afterwards, or on a later age, you see more stress within your flock. And this stress is reducing your production and fertility. If it's really necessary for whatever reason, you can separate them, but then at 4 weeks of age, we really recommend to put them together. Another question, do they require the same conditions, the same temperatures, for example? We tend to see that the males require a little bit higher temperatures, which is also challenging if you rear them together, obviously. But that's something to take into account. We talked a lot about the behavioral pattern during the day, and that's actually quite similar, I would say. So feed consumption in the morning, egg production around a few hours after lights turning on. There is a resting phase, so that's still the same as well. However, we have far more feed turns when you look to layer breeding compared to broiler breeding, because simply there is just more push to get the feed intake in as well. There is a mating behavior, so don't apply the feed during mating behavior, as you might disturb them a bit. And afterwards, there is a feeding moment again. Why do I have so much more feeding moments compared to the broiler breeders? It's the same for the layers. We really need to push feed in. So the feed intake is always limiting, and you would like to have a stable body weight once they're in production. If the females are losing body weight, then whether it's fertility, hatchability, or chick quality, but one of those or even a combination is going down. What's also more linked with the broiler breeders is that we see the number of matings mainly in the afternoon. And if the birds are getting older, the number of matings are going down as well. So when we talk about hatchability, and I saw for broiler breeders around 80 to 90 or 85% of hatchability, that's slightly different compared to when we look towards the layers. When we look to layers, you see that the hatchability is rather high, and it remains flat as well. So there's a huge difference in there. The reason for us is focus on a stable hatchability. However, as mentioned also by Van Emus, at a certain moment, hatchability is going down, and that's the same for the layers. At a certain moment, often between 75 or 80 weeks, we tend to see a decline a little bit in hatchability, and that's the reason why the parent stock flocks are not kept as long as the layer flocks. It means that the production is there, the egg production is there, but fertility is going down at a certain moment. Which is slightly different perhaps, is we don't focus too much on hatchability, but we tend to focus more on the number of female chicks, because that's at the end what is being sold, or what's the commercial laying hen, it's the female chick. We talked a bit about the ratio between males and females, and to see a better feather quality in broiler breeders when you have a lower ratio of males and females, and that's exactly the same. We see a ratio between males and females of around 7%, 8 perhaps, but we also have flocks of 5 to 6% of male and female ratios. As long as the fertility is there, then, and depending on the bird behavior, it's better to reduce the amount of males, because a lower amount of males will result in a better feather quality, and better feather quality will be more acceptance for mating. Obviously, when fertility is going down because you have a too low number of males, then you should increase again. You see that the number of males also depend a little bit on the housing system. Yeah, especially when you look, for example, to family cages as well, it's more difficult because you still would like to have a few males in your family cage. If you have mortality, otherwise, you have a really change in ratio. Bird behavior, as I mentioned, we just see more calmness in your flock and more mating when you have a lower amount of males. And there's also less competition in the males, which is making more the calmness. If you have a too high number of males, then we can see more disturbances, and that often result in reduced performance and reduced fertility. And sometimes when we talk about overmating, then you see that the females start to hide for the males, whether it's underneath the nest boxes, nest boxes, or underneath the equipment, but they can start to hide. If so, we really advise to remove the surplus of the males. Also, when you have early maturity of the males, but the females are not ready yet, then we can see some encircling of the females. And that will result in a reduced feed intake of the females and a reduced growth as well. So also at sexual maturity, you really need to be careful that both the males and the females, although housed, reared, and fed with the same systems, are parallel. If you see those kind of behaviors from happening, then we say take away around 30% of your males in a different pen, and if you place them back, do it gradually during the dark periods. What's the reason? This will give more time towards your female to start growing again, and only when she has the good body weight, she can start producing. In general, what I didn't mention yet is when we look to the females compared to the commercials, we tend to see a later start of lay, later onset of lay. And the reason is you're not using the hatching eggs from the beginning anyway. Around 24, 25 weeks of age is the first moment you can start using the eggs being produced for hatching. And the later the female comes into the laying period, the heavier she will be, the higher egg weight we will have as well. So we see better performance if you do so. In general, the body weight is around 50 grams lighter for the parent stock compared to the commercial, so that's also reflecting a little bit back in your egg weight. And then when we talk about male management, we can have the different systems. So for example, if you use the family cages or if you use artificial insemination, you might consider that the height of the cage should be much higher compared to just female housing. As you can see also for this one, it's really important to have enough highness for the males that he can be comfortable. Further also, there's a certain function of the beak. Beak trimming is still allowed in a lot of different countries, but there is a certain function from the beak. And the function from the beak, if you look to a breeding perspective, is the grip from the male on the female during mating. So if we don't have a good beak shape from the male, we see less matings because it's just more difficult to remain the grip, and we see a lower fertility. There's also a function of the comb and the wattles, because the comb and the wattles, they reflect the testosterone level of the males, which has an important role for the attractiveness from the females. Which means if we remove the comb and we remove the wattles, for example, and we have a beak trimming, which is more severe than it should be, we can see the other side effect, not the females being scared for the males, but the males being scared for the females. If the males are scared for the females, they start hiding in the nest box, they start hiding underneath the system, and obviously when they start hiding, we don't see mating behavior, and no mating behavior will result in no fertility as well. So it's really important to keep those things as it should be. And when you do male selection, because you have too many males, or for whatever reason, always focus on what's my good male, what's my non-good male. So which one is active, which one is not active, which one should I select, and which one I would like to continue. Take into consideration like the wattles, the comb, certain lesions, perhaps the beak trimming. And have the behavioral observation again, because it will really help you. If we then talk about male quality, you might consider, if you look to both of those males, and you need to select one of them, I think everybody will know which one to take out. The bird on the right side is really difficult to have the proper grip during mating, so he's most likely not productive. And then just a little bit more information about fertilization. Fertilization, well, there are a lot of different billions sperm cells in the hen, or in the rooster, sorry. And in the hen, the semen is stored in the storage glands. So the storage glands are over here, remaining alive approximately 3 weeks. Yesterday I heard it could be up to 15 weeks, but then it really goes down in terms of fertility. But around 3 weeks, we can see a nice storage of the sperm cells. We see also maximum fertility around 3 to 4 days after mating. And afterwards, the sperm cells are moving slowly upwards towards the infundibulum, where you can really see the merge with the egg yolk. And we tend to see that around 30 sperm cells must enter the yolk before you have a good chance for fertility as well. And further, the egg process afterwards is the same as the commercial laying hen. So the egg white is going to be around it, and the eggshell is being produced. Egg storage, we talked a little bit about hatchery and hatchability in the presentation from Dr. Koets. But we do see obviously an effect of storage, egg storage. So the longer your egg storage, often the lower the temperatures, or you have all kinds of methods, like spites, for example, to increase again your fertility. However, dehydration, that's really one of the biggest factors influencing your hatchability as well. So therefore, not only the temperature, but also your relatively humidity is really important when you talk about egg storage in terms of hatchability. And then egg weight loss. There are different percentages of egg weight loss, and we do see a difference in recommendation of egg weight loss when the bird is getting older. Also, the egg weight, of course, is slightly increasing, but the egg weight loss has a certain minimum and a certain maximum. When we have too much egg weight loss, you have a smaller chick. It's not good. When we have not enough egg weight loss, then you don't have a big air cell, so it's really difficult for the chick to pip. So you need to always measure the egg weight loss, and that can really influence what you should do in terms of your hatchability process and program. And this can also determine whether you need to have more or less loss in terms of, for example, humidity or temperatures. And then the last part, when we talk about nutrition and hatchability, I think it's quite well known that as soon as you have oxidative stress, hatchability will go down. Oxidative stress is resulting in a higher embryonic mortality. And that can be caused, for example, by micronutrient deficiency, mycotoxin contamination, or not so good eggshell quality. Eggshell quality can go both sides. When we see too strong eggshell quality, then the chick is getting too weak when he starts pipping because it takes too much energy. That's the reason why there is a certain limit on the eggshell quality breeding as well. When we have a low eggshell quality, obviously your gas exchange and your eggshell loss or egg weight loss is being affected, so that's not good either. And if we then look a little bit more about oxidative stress in the egg yolk, well, the egg yolk obviously contains a lot of different lipids. And fat-soluble antioxidants, they really can help you to increase the resistance for lipid peroxidation. And this lipid peroxidation, at the end, will result in embryonic mortality. Well, what kind of antioxidants are we talking about if we would like to prevent this from happening? It's vitamin E, selenium, carotenoids. Those are the most important ones. So all of them are also stored in the egg yolk. So you might consider, indeed, being stored in the egg yolk really will have an effect on this lipid peroxidation reduction, and therefore embryonic mortality reduction. There are a lot of other vitamins. That's not only those, but there are a lot of other vitamins as well. Vitamin A, B6, B12, D, K, and some other B vitamins. So it's really important to take into account that parent stocks always have a different premix compared to the commercials. You just need to have more vitamins and some more minerals to support this laying chick from hatching. And then when we talk about mycotoxin, everybody knows a little bit about mycotoxin and it might harm the bird. But what we also do see is mycotoxin can be vertically transmitted towards the embryo, and that will really interfere with the embryonic development. So at the end, that will result in a higher embryonic mortality. If you look towards the female side, it will interfere with the ovary development as well, so less production of eggs, and it can have a negative effect overall on the eggshell quality as well. If we look on the male side, then there is a decrease in testicular development and a decrease in sperm quality or sperm livability motility. So again, a different purpose for the birds, but they're fed the same diet, but also the mycotoxin effect is both negative for both of them. The eggshell quality, I already shortly touched upon this topic. The eggshell quality is really important for the control of humidity loss or the control of egg weight loss. It also kind of protection barrier for certain contaminations which can come in, and it's really important for the bird for pipping. It should be able to come out of the egg as well, otherwise you don't see. Often pipping is also related with the humidity that we have in the hatcher, for example, or in the incubator. And then about feathering. As we mentioned, if feather quality of the laying hen is going down, then also mating is going down, fertility will go down as well. So it's really, really important to focus on the feather quality of your laying hen, and in this case, the parent stock hen. And what is all kind of effects that's affecting this? It's the housing system. So for example, open housing, high stocking density, but mainly also draft and temperatures that can induce a lot of stressors, and stressors can result in feather packing. Health can have a huge effect, especially when we look to parasites, for example, the red mites, but also gut health can be quite of a stressor, and obviously beak trimming can reduce the effects from feather packing. When we talk about lighting, it's the type of light, the intensity, the distribution, but also sunlight and flickering light. So sometimes the light for humans is just solid, but for the chicken it can still be flickering. They have a different spectrum. And when we look to feed presentation, the feed structure is a really important one. The laying hens, they like to have a little bit more coarse feed structure. And when you're feeding pellets, for example, then we talk about the feed structure which is in the crop, because at the end they need to have some structure in their gizzard. And if we feed finely milled pellets, then perhaps your feed intake is still good, but as soon as the pellet arrives in the crop, it falls apart and there's nothing to grind for the gizzard. Feeding techniques, but also like the feeding times, feeding distributions, the speed of the feeding chains, those kind of things. And feeder and drinker competition, that should be prevented anyway. Then the nutritional values. So fiber is an important one. If we then compare parent stocks compared to commercial stocks, then we see a different type of housing often, because you talk about floor housing instead of cage housing. You also see quite a difference then in the fiber requirement for the birds. Well, amino acids, vitamins, mineral, mycotoxins, they all have an impact also from the nutritional side. And then the bird, well, mating behavior, the more mating, lower feather quality, but also genetics has an impact there. And that was actually my presentation about layer breeding. So thank you for your attention. And,